Hello, it's Kallee with Magoosh. Today I'm going to talk to you about pacing. Pacing is so important on the GMAT, partly because of the score penalties associated with not finishing the sections, particularly the quantitative section, and because you can't skip questions and come back to them, like many of us might have done on our college exams to help us manage time. So stick around and I'll share with you my top 3 tips for managing pace on the GMAT. My first pacing tip is to use timing benchmarks. These benchmarks are guides that tell you how many problems you should have completed by a certain point within the exam, if you're moving at the right pace. I prefer to check in every 4 problems for quant and every 6 problems for verbal, so I'll put my guides on screen and I'll walk you through how to use them. Over on the quant side, since we're checking in every 4 questions, that means our check-ins will happen every 8 minutes, since we have 2 minutes per problem on quant. So when the first guide says finish 4 by 54, that means when you finish the 4th question, you would check the timer on screen and it should say 54 minutes remaining, because the GMAT timer counts down from the total amount of time you have for the entire section. Over on verbal, it was a little bit more difficult to figure out these guides. I couldn't space them exactly evenly, so since we're checking in every 6 problems, it's going to be 11 minutes for all of the check-ins except the very first one. On that one, we only have 10 minutes, and that's because I had to remove a minute somewhere to make it so that we would finish on time, and the beginning of the test felt like the best place because generally the questions are going to be a little bit easier towards the beginning, and then the algorithm will usually adjust up for harder problems. So here on the verbal guides, when it says finish 6 by 55, that means when you finish question number 6, you would check that timer on screen and it should say 55 minutes remaining. Really easy for you to tell whether you're ahead or behind and to start making adjustments for that. My second pacing tip is to set up your page for success. That means dividing up your scratch paper in advance so you can keep your work organized and you have a way to integrate timing benchmarks like the ones we just talked about. So I'm going to show you what I do for the quantitative and the verbal sections, but these are just to give you an example. It's a starting point, but you should feel free to modify from there to make them fit your needs. So we'll start on the quant side. As you can see, I've shown 8 miniature pages, and then each page is divided into 4. That leaves 1/4 of a page for each quantitative problem. That works out perfectly, because that means we'll have 4 questions per page, so it lines up exactly right with the timing benchmarks we went through already. The way this works is, I would do my first 4 questions, so I would have filled up my first page, and then before flipping to the next page, I would check my timing benchmark, which is written right at the bottom right-hand corner. Since it says 54 minutes, I just check the clock and confirm that I'm on pace, or if I'm ahead or behind, adjust my pace to fit where it should be. Now, I'll point out here that the last box on the final page is blacked out, and that's just to indicate that there's only 3 questions on that page. And that's because of the odd number of problems on the quantitative section. But we've already accounted for that in our pacing guides. As you can see, we've left just 6 minutes for the final page, so you still have exactly 2 minutes per problem there. Now we'll take a look at verbal. It's a little bit simpler, and that's because it doesn't really make sense, at least for me, to divide up the pages to leave so much space for each problem, because I don't necessarily take a lot of notes on every single verbal question. So instead, we just have our timing benchmarks across the top of the page, and then right below that, I actually have a crossout technique. Now, I know crossout techniques are not usually thought of as a part of pacing, but in my opinion, they're a really effective way to speed up on the verbal section without sacrificing accuracy. So most people find it annoying to write A, B, C, D, E a bunch of times over and over for every time they want to cross out. Instead, we just set each letter up like a column, and then each question can be a row below that. So you can just put a little X or a check below each answer choice to indicate a right or wrong answer. My rule of thumb for when to use this is if I find myself rereading an answer choice, that means there's a possibility that I'm going to read something I had already eliminated, or second guess myself, or otherwise accidentally pick an answer I didn't need to. So at that point, when I'm rereading and comparing answer choices, I know the question is hard enough that I should write that stuff down on my page, get it out of my head, clear my working memory, so I can focus on the problem at hand instead of remembering which answer choices had been eliminated. And that's why I've shown this crossout technique twice at the top of the page, because for me, it's about 2/3 of the questions on the verbal section where I'm going to eliminate answers. So I need a lot of rows available to do all of those crossouts. And I prefer to leave the bottom half of my page totally open for all of the other notes that I take on the verbal section. My last pacing strategy is what I call let it go. Let go of questions that tend to take you way too long, you tend to get wrong, or both. Those questions are not actually adding many points to your score, but what they are doing is eating up your time and your mental energy and often causing a lot of stress because you can tell as you're doing them that they're not going well, and you're also aware that they're eating into the time that you have for the rest of the exam. So what you want to do as much as possible is take those seconds that are sort of wasted on those incorrect questions, particularly the very slow incorrect questions, and shift those seconds towards problems that you could get right if you had a little bit more time. And you do that by abandoning those useless problems as you go. Now, I know it's a little bit counterintuitive, but think about it like this. If you're going to get a question wrong, you want to get that question wrong as fast as possible because every second spent on it is pretty much wasted. So abandoning questions prevents that panic and it allows you to take control of your test. Shift that wasted time to more productive problems and you will see the number of questions you're getting right go up because the questions that you're no longer solving are ones that were wrong anyways, and the calmness that you feel when you're on track in terms of pace, along with those actual extra seconds that you have to solve, is almost guaranteed to allow you a couple more right answers if you're someone who's been struggling with pace throughout. The added benefit is that, of course, not running out of time in this section means you also avoid a score penalty that many of you might have been experiencing if you've been running out of time, for example, on the quantitative section. So if you're wondering how many questions you should let go of, that totally depends on your individual pace. And that's why it's so important to have timing benchmarks so that you can tell how far ahead or behind you are. So if I checked in on my timing benchmark and it was supposed to say 54 minutes remaining, for example, but in fact it said 52 minutes remaining, then I would know I was about one question behind. So of course, if I could speed up and just answer a little bit more quickly without skipping a question, as in guessing, that would be ideal. But a lot of times it's just not possible to solve more quickly and still get a right answer. So I might be looking for an opportunity to sacrifice a problem on my next set of questions before my next check-in so that I'm back on track and I never have that feeling of panic. One more quick note when it comes to letting problems go. Abandoning a question strategically does not mean that you're failing, and it doesn't even mean that you're giving up, because your goal actually is not to solve that problem. Your goal isn't to solve any individual problem. Your goal is to maximize your overall GMAT score, and sometimes the best way to do that is by not solving a particular question. So when you make a quick guess on a question because you can tell it's going to take you way longer than you have, or it's likely to be wrong, or both, you're actually being very smart and strategic. You're prioritizing your overall score, and you're not allowing it to be hijacked by one impossible question. You're taking control of your test, and that is the way to get the highest possible GMAT score. So I hope these strategies have been helpful. I'm excited to hear how they go when you apply them to your practice tests. Happy studying, everyone!